Zoom and if they have questions or comments. You'll just let us know.
Yeah, she's watching the Zoom.
Are you gonna relate to us any eye rolls that we get from them, so that we know? Okay. Let's go ahead and start the meeting with roll call.
Chair Sanders,
Here.
Vice Chair Hibbert,
Here.
Committee members Perez and Reason, Holt,
Here.
Keller, Louis,
Mr. Keller did let me know that he'd be running about 15 minutes late, but he'd be in person.
Louis. Can you unmute yourself, please, Committee Member Louis?
Julie, did you also say that Connie was online? Did she? She's not.
She's not here yet. I'll come back to Louis. Prince
Here.
and Roland. Tobias?
Here.
Committee Member Louis, can you unmute yourself and let us know if you're here? Committee Member Louis is present. I don't know if his microphone is not working. I'm going to have technology services look
Can
into it.
he hear you? Can you tell if he can give you a thumbs up?
Committee Member Louis, can you please give us a thumbs up if you can hear us? Look like you can hear us, Troy.
Is there anybody else that is logged in with their video that can let us know if they can hear us?
We do have some city staff members logged on.
Can they hear us?
Brianna, can you hear us? Brianna, can you hear us? You're muted, Brianna. Can you unmute yourself and let us know if you can hear us? Michelle, can you hear us?
Is this session being recorded?
It is.
So as people hop on, I mean, is this a core 1, 2, 3, 4, 5? I guess it's the majority. Can we just proceed with the meeting, encourage those who can't hear to pick it up on the recorded version? I mean, I don't plan on voting on anything today, it's more of a listening,
It is also being streamed
if they can hear it.
on the website. And I believe that stream does have audio, correct?
We're working on that right now.
Chair. My name is, and board members, my name is Troy Hightower. I'm a local consultant and we work on economic and community development projects. And we're trying to focus on the disadvantaged communities. I can be brief on that three things I'd like to bring up. Number one is a lighting study that I requested to this panel on the very first round of measuring in. And I've since asked at the city council meeting the status of that. My understanding is underway, but I think that it's been 2 years, and I think that's very important because lighting, street lighting is very important to public safety. The second is we're in support of a reserve or an ongoing fund for economic development projects at 10 million or more per year. And also that money could be used to leverage projects or grants, not necessarily use the money for one main project, but use the money to support or leverage other projects that may be coming up, like the TCC projects. And finally, I have a concern about the public notice for these meetings. We missed the last meeting because by the time we found out about it, the meeting had already been held. And so we just found out about this late Tuesday. So we are concerned about the time for public notice. Thank you.
Before the next public comment, we're going to try the speakers one more time.
Committee Member Louis, can you hear us?
I can.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll go ahead and continue then with public comment. Is there anybody else that joined us online? Will you just let us know when they do? Thank you. Emma De La Rosa.
Good afternoon. My name is Emma De La Rosa, Policy Advocate with Leadership Council for Justice and Accountability. Working alongside members of environmental justice communities in Bakersfield, I can affirmatively state that there is a need for basic infrastructure in these neighborhoods. Communities lack sidewalks, lighting, ADA-compliant infrastructure, green spaces, safe bike routes, and overall a safe, walkable environment. Just a quick question. Do all of you have those infrastructures? Do you all have sidewalks? Not invited. For the most part, right? Yeah. So those are basic infrastructure, right, that we all deserve and that we all have a right to. The funds in question today can help fund projects in environmental justice communities to ensure an equitable distribution of resources throughout the city of Bakersfield. Participatory budgeting is a democratic process in which community members decide how to spend a public budget and gives the community decision-making power over government funds. Participatory budget consists of 4 main phases: brainstorm ideas, develop proposals, cast a vote, and fund winning projects. Pretty simple, only 4 steps. Moreover, the city has the support of community-based organizations who are ready to work collaboratively with the city to implement this process. I call on the committee to please support a participatory budget process. It is not enough to have staff recommendations reviewed during these meetings without publicly released supporting materials to allow public review and public comments on the 2021-22 proposals. This is not an example of a participatory budgeting. I respectfully request the committee to hold a discussion on actionable steps to support a participatory budgeting process. City staff, I respectfully request your commitment to the community in supporting a participatory budgeting process in addition to an email or a website, which does not allow for a two-way communication, transparency, nor a truly democratic process. Thank you.
Mr. Lane, you're up next.
Thank you again for this opportunity. I appreciate the staff was willing to transmit to you the letter and the attachment as well as the pictures. I have the pictures in color if somebody wants to see them later. I have some questions, concerns, and really it relates back to what was just said. How is the public engaged in this process? I'm not sure. I think a lot of people are not sure. How is information about the proposed expenditure of the PSVS dollars readily available to the public? What options are being given to this committee? Seemingly none. Fourth, habitat issues. I'm from the Sierra Club. I walked along the Kern River and I sent you pictures. My goodness, we've got terribly serious problems along the Kern. So the question, how are these issues being addressed in these recommendations? Is there a comprehensive plan to address these issues? This has to be more than a one-time only cleanup. And finally, I submitted the budgetary information, and this is, I've said this meeting after meeting, how is the issue of equitable distribution of the funding throughout the community being addressed? So I would ask that these questions be addressed during the formulation of the funding process here for fiscal year 21-22. Again, thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. Can we just take this time now to do an official roll call, now that we have the audio working?
Chair Sanders,
Here.
Vice Chair Hibbert,
Here.
Committee Members Perez and Andreessen, Holt,
Here.
Keller,
Here.
Louis,
Here.
Prince,
Here.
Roland,
Here.
and Tobias.
Here.
Thank you for that, and if you could just let us know if this is President Andreessen, Logan, I think that's the only one, right? Yep. We'll proceed with public comment. Ms. Patel.
Hi, so echoing the comments that Emma and Eddie already said, you are not truly engaging the community on this issue. It's noon on a Thursday. No one from the working class community would even be able to make these meetings and tell you what you want. And on top of that, the participatory budgeting process, which has been brought to Christian Craig's attention, he responded with, it's too heavy of a lift. Oh, sorry, go ahead. Oh, I'm so sorry, thank you so much. I'm loud already, but, so, can I start over, or is this fine?
I think you're fine.
Okay, so when Christian Clegg was approached about a participatory budgeting process, he said that it was too heavy of a lift for our community. There are volunteers, more than 50 I know for sure, that would put in time and effort to get a participatory budgeting process set up for our community. People's Budget Bakersfield, which I know the chair has already received the in-depth survey that they've done with the community for what the community actually needs other than funding for the police, has actually done the effort and the time to actually show the committee what they want. And the committee already has been provided this information. And I really wanted to stress, CAPK even sent around a survey, and I really want to stress the things that our community actually needs prioritized. None of this money should be going to the police until we have got this stuff figured out. So CAPK asked if the community needed adult education, preschool, kindergarten readiness, job skills training, financial education, health and nutrition education, tutoring and reading assistance, affordable childcare, after school and summer recreation, youth employment, youth leadership, senior programs, health insurance, teen pregnancy prevention, mental health treatment, substance abuse treatment, nutritious food, immigration and citizenship help, transportation, services and program in rural areas, building credits, business startup programs, affordable housing, homelessness services, utility assistances, therapy for victims of violent crime, food, no contact delivery food and necessities, rent and mortgage assistance, utility assistance, emergency cashing, no cost healthcare, tutoring education assistance, homeless services, internet access for at-home work and school, childcare, in-home childcare, employment assistance, COVID help, and more. You guys understand that none of this money should be going to the police unless the needs of our community are met first. The police are not going to give our community housing, they're not going to give us food, they're not going to help with any of the things that we actually need. And as Emma highlighted, the very basic necessities of streetlights, sidewalks, our communities are begging for the bare minimum, and the failure of this committee to even actually engage the public in a real way is very, very present, especially the failure of Christian Clegg when saying that a participatory budgeting process is too heavy of a lift. You're just lazy.
That would be our last public comment. So we'll go ahead and open it up to you, Mr. Hewitt, Mr. Wood.
Good afternoon, committee members. Should I make a little closer for a second? Happy to be here with you today, and just provide a little bit of high-level context. This year we have a little more time. Last year was very odd with the pandemic and the re-budgeting that we did. But this is the first of 3 meetings. We're not making decisions today. We wanted to just provide you with the dollar figures, with the courage we have now, the information to share of what's the scope of the budget for next year, walk through at a high level some of the areas that we're considering as projects, and this is an opportunity for feedback from this committee. And then at our next 2 meetings, we'll then walk through and have specific projects that are presented by the departments, and we plan to put out probably in the next 2 weeks a memo that has all of the projects proposed by the departments and through the city manager's office that will be out in advance of both of the meetings, and so that will be a public document, and folks will be able to dig into that and take a look at those proposals before both of the 2 meetings in April. For the viewing public, our next meeting is April 9th, and that has been scheduled. And our 3rd meeting, we're still trying to pin down the date later in April for that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Huant to walk us through the presentation, and I'll try not to interrupt him too often, but we'll jump in here and there.
Continue the technology difficulties here. Lena, you're just going to have to help me out here if you get the next slide. Again, good afternoon, everyone. Chris Hewitt with the City Manager's Office. Today we wanted to walk through a brief presentation to give you an outline of where we're headed in this process. As Mr. Clegg mentioned, we have 3 meetings scheduled for this committee to review the proposals for next fiscal year. And as I will walk through them today at a very high level, I wanted to remind the committee that what we're looking at is the additional proposals. This is not looking back for the past years, although we'll have some discussion about that. This is really meant to look at and focus on new proposals that will be coming before this committee and then the City Council. So again, the committee will be reviewing the proposals and making recommendations based upon the information that staff's provided and looking at those 13 community priorities that are within the measure. Obviously, the main objective of the committee is to provide that input and recommendations connected to those proposals. Next slide, please. As Mr. Clegg mentioned, we'll have very detailed department memos and fiscal information that will be provided to this group and to the public in advance of the April 9th meeting. That will include, just for clarity, that will likely include information on all of the department proposals, even though you'll be hearing department proposals in 2 different meetings over the next month. So we're going to try to get all of that information to you prior to the April 9th meeting for every department. Again, a little bit different than last year. You'll see many of the department heads that are in the audience today come before you to present their specific proposals. They'll be available for questions. And staff will take the recommendations and the feedback from this committee to the City Council when we kick off the formal budget process for next fiscal year starting on May 5th. Next slide, please. Won't spend too long here on this slide, but I did want to revisit those 13 community priorities very quickly. Again, these are the ones that we've talked about over the last several years that were inherent in the formation of the measure. Many of them revolve around public safety, beautification, economic development, homelessness, enhancing our neighborhoods and the community overall. So again, as we start to look at the proposals, we will have the nexus back to these priorities. I can tell you that from an internal standpoint, we reflect with our departments regularly these priorities and the feedback that has been provided as they develop their proposals. Next slide, please. So again, as we move into next year, this will be the third full year of the measure implementation. As you all know, through your review, we've been able to address many community needs through phase 1 and phase 2 of the implementation process. We'll get into a bit more detail in just a moment, but we do anticipate some moderate revenue growth going into next year, and there are a few different reasons why that we'll touch upon. The phase 3 proposals that will be predominantly being discussed with this committee over the next month will likely be a bit more limited in scope than you've seen in the past. And what I mean by that is really on the staffing side. Will be a little bit more limited in scope outside of some of those key initiative areas that we've talked about. We are proposing several significant projects and programs that are intended to have a wider and bigger impact across all corners of the community. Again, there are some focus areas that I'll get into a little bit more here in the next several slides, but you'll see quite a bit of focus on public safety, on local parks, on high-profile infrastructure projects, and ensuring, again, the viability of all of our local neighborhoods. Next slide, please. I want to talk a little bit about the revenue update, where we're at, what we've seen over the last several months. Of course, this last year has been very unique in terms of revenue. City revenue, as you all know, at the start of this budget cycle, we had to do quite a bit of work to retool the budget based on some revised projections when things started to shut down in early 2020. What you see here is that reflected in actual sales tax receipts for each quarter going back to the third quarter of 2019. So you see, again, we saw a bit of a dip in the first quarter of 2020 that was not unexpected necessarily. But then since that point in time, we've seen consistent growth in measure revenue when you look quarter over quarter. The holiday period, which is the period that we just got information for, the fourth quarter of 2020, did see some significant revenue growth when you compare it to that same quarter in the last year. So you should modest growth. What we're seeing is quite a bit of strong sales activity in general consumer goods, auto sales actually, and the construction sectors, which include things like your home improvement stores. This also includes online sales, and so again, the numbers that you see here on a quarterly basis reflect some significant increases in those different areas. Not unsurprising, we've seen some declines year over year in restaurants, hotels, fuel service stations, and again, those have that nexus back to some of those restrictions that we've seen both statewide and throughout the nation as it relates to travel and going to a restaurant and the like. So we have seen some declines. However, some increases in those other areas have essentially offset and actually grown sales tax revenue. The other thing that we're tracking very closely, and I think we've talked to the committee about this before, is a program that the state has to actually allow certain businesses to defer sales tax payments. We have to take that into consideration as we're building out our revenue projections. We actually saw a little bit of an uptick. Again, it wasn't unexpected in the fourth quarter because the state essentially revived that program and it was applicable starting in the fourth quarter of last year. So we do have an estimated $1.2 million of sales tax that was actually deferred from businesses in the fourth quarter. It's intended to be made up in future quarters, but in all likelihood, we will not see that full $1.2 million actually repaid, as unfortunately you have businesses that deferred in part because they were shut down and are permanently closed. Next slide, please. Just quickly, I wanted to share with you for the fourth quarter, just to give you a snapshot of, again, the breakdown of where the funding comes from in terms of industry sector. Again, I talked about general consumer goods, autos and transportations. Auto and transportation, you can see, again, these are the broad categories that the state defines in terms of categorizing those businesses that remit sales and use tax. So again, just wanted to provide this to the committee and the public for a bit of insight on where that revenue is actually coming from, the types of businesses that it's coming from. Next slide, please. Stepping back and looking at this in a bit bigger picture, looking into next year, we are again looking at some moderate revenue growth in fiscal year 22. This is likely going to be due to a few things. We certainly believe that there's continued growth just in the local economy in general. But beyond that, obviously, there's the infusion of stimulus funding that we do expect to have some impact. Business reopening plans are underway. We see, again, more businesses allowed to engage in more business in terms of some of those state regulations. We have seen some data to suggest that there will be increased travel and just a general economic recovery period going into the next fiscal year. We do have to remain cautious, and this is something that was in the back of our mind before the pandemic hit. The economy as a whole has been in a general growth mode, more or less, for over 10 years. It's one of the longest economic expansions in the country's history. So we are cautious, as always, that, again, just those natural economic cycles may occur, and we are, again, projecting some level of increase in revenue, but these are all the different factors that go into why we landed on the number we did. I also want to confirm with the committee that, as you recall, we may have some balance that we end this fiscal year with. Again, that could be where a position, there may be position savings because we hired the person halfway through the year, but we were budgeted for a full year. It may be that that something costs less than we anticipated. And so any of that, and there may be some revenue that exceeds, obviously, our projections. So all that will be calculated into an end-of-year fund balance, and much like we did this year, we'll bring something to this committee around the mid-year time when we have those numbers calculated, and we will look to make some recommendations specifically with those funds, but we did want to make clear that this number did not include, this revenue estimate actually does not include that amount.
Just wanted to take a moment to also remind us of a couple of factors. So last year, on the Public Safety Vital Services tax side, we had originally anticipated closer to almost an $80 million budget pre-pandemic. And then we saw those decline down to about that $69 million amount that we used. On the general fund side, we actually saw nearly a $28 million reduction in revenues from the city, and that's outside the scope of this budget. But just to make some of those comparisons, we tightened up our belts on the general fund side, and we've been fortunate that things have gone a little bit better than we anticipated. We were very conservative, and the CARES monies had their impacts in assisting us in reimbursing some of our direct expenses. And so we're actually in a pretty good position on the general fund side, but just reflecting that, we took a really big step back last year in both sections of the general fund, the regular general fund and the PSVS general fund. At the same rate, we're also aware of the American Rescue Plan, and the right now, today, the federal government has identified that the city of Bakersfield will be receiving $96 million over the next 2 years out of these stimulus funds. Again, we're not going to necessarily discuss all of those allocations, in this setting before the city council budget, but be aware that there are going to be opportunities to do economic recovery and important capital projects and economic development projects from those funding sources. And so we're looking at the full spectrum of things that we need to get done, but knowing we have our regular capital improvement program, the city's general fund, the public safety vital services measure, as well as these Rescue Act funds. And so as we go through some of the question and answer, we may say, well, that might be an area that we're looking a little more towards the Rescue Act monies as opposed to the PSVS monies. And so wanted to set that context that there are these other sources that we're thinking about, big projects and also just, maintaining the services that the city provides through multiple sources.
Did you say it was 96 million over a set number of years?
Yes, the estimate for the rescue plan to the city of Bakersfield, $96 million. We expect to receive that in 2 installments over a period of about 2 years. Next slide, please. So we're going to go into a preview of the proposals that, again, the departments will be coming before this committee over the next 2 meetings and talking to you about in much greater detail. The intent today was, again, based upon the feedback from the committee and others over the course of the year, was to, again, provide a first take on a lot of these proposals. And then, again, the detail will come over the next 2 meetings. There is, as Chair Sanders mentioned today, there is no formal vote on any of these today. It's a receive and file presentation only, and additional information will be forthcoming. Next slide, please. So fiscal year 22, starting July 1 of 2021. Again, these are the proposals of new allocations of measure money that are being proposed by staff for the committee's feedback and recommendation. We'll see that the proposals really reflect the feedback and the input of the city council, the committee, and our public stakeholders that has occurred over the last several years. We are anticipating, and as you'll see, fewer staffing requests than in the past 2 years. I think we've eclipsed the 100 staff members over the last couple years. So we are going to see fewer staff members overall, staffing positions overall in this proposal. Again, we're focused on those major initiatives meant to significantly and positively impact the entire community. Again, we'll get into a bit more detail on these different areas that I've listed here. Next slide, please. We do expect to allocate the full $77.9 million in appropriations for next year. We do anticipate, and I know this was a question of the committee last year, we do anticipate for the phase 1 and phase 2 proposals that we will have about $37 million in ongoing expenditures within the measure. And again, I just want to remind the committee that includes all the previously approved staffing across all of those different departments that have PSVS positions. It includes things like our rapid response teams. Committee member will give a question.
Did you just say that the prior commitments of the last 2 years would amount to $30-something million? Is that what you said, 30?
Correct, yes.
I got it in print here, it says $50.6 million in fiscal year 2022.
Correct, I'm gonna clarify that in just a moment on my third bullet point here. So again, if we look at the items that have been approved again over the last 2 fiscal years, we expect moving into next fiscal year, if you just wanted to kind of break those out and understand what this committee has already seen and what has been approved, those programs equal about $37 million in ongoing expenditures. Again, that includes things, again, like the rapid response teams that are out engaging with homeless individuals throughout the community, our parks rapid response teams that are addressing critical issues in our 61 parks, our navigation center that opened this past year. It includes ongoing funding, obviously, to maintain that facility and to operate that facility. Our recently enacted Clean Cities teams, again, that's part of those ongoing programs to keep those teams on the street removing litter and debris. Our economic opportunity areas and several of our economic development programs, again, will all be continued or expected to be continued into next year to, again, be able to continue to provide those services and programs to the community. Where I would like to clarify is when we start to look at the proposals that are coming before you, just at a very high level, what we're looking at now is if you add phase 3 into those ongoing expenditures, that's where we get to about the $50 million number. That's our preliminary estimate of what the ongoing expenditures, so think that $77.9 million number, that's the total amount of PSVS revenue that we expect to have to program for next fiscal year. We expect about $50 million of that if we include those phase 3 programs that you're going to hear about over the next couple meetings. That makes up about $50 million of that $77.9 million. When we look at that $50 million number, 36% of that is salary and benefits for all the staff, and then 18% of that is other ongoing costs that are outside of salary and benefits. Next slide, please. So again, this is some high-level previews of the different proposals that staff will be bringing forward. We'll start with public safety. Again, one of the goals of the measure, and one of the things we've talked about over the last several years, was that continued supplementing of the police department to provide additional resources, to put essentially more officers on the street, to provide enhanced levels of service for the community, respond to calls quicker, and address other quality of life type of calls that currently may still be lower on the priority list in terms of how the police department triages those calls. So again, this proposal will bring an additional 28 sworn positions. It will also bring a number of non-sworn professional staffs to support ongoing operations of the department. And I know that the chief and his team, when they're in front of you, will talk a bit more about the nexus between these non-sworn professional staff and the work that they're doing on the front lines as well, and how they interplay with each other. So again, you'll notice that we say addition of non-sworn professional staff. There's a few minor tweaks we're making in terms of the precise number in some of these areas, but that will all be a part of the information that gets to you well in advance of the next meeting where we're talking about this in a bit more detail. Next slide, please. Well,
Hi, I'm sorry. Thanks, Chris, for the presentation. And I was asked the chairperson if we had a question along the way, and she said, yeah, just go ahead and cut you off. So that's what I'm doing. I wanted to step back, actually, to a question that I had about the ongoing overhead. And this actually respects to the question that fellow committee member had as well. Based upon the figures that you're giving us, it almost indicates that 70%, when we talk about the 50.6 million of the 77.9 that is projected, is going to be allocated to ongoing costs. And I thought about a year or so ago, we mentioned the fact that we wanted a budget kind of within a budget to make sure that we did not exceed a certain percentage of ongoing costs due to the fact that it would tie this process on these monies to something that would not allow, based upon the sales tax in the future, to possibly give us a room to be able to adjust to do new projects, whatever may come down the line. And so, trying to use layman's terms here, just to indicate the fact that I think we are overstretching ourselves to a annual, ongoing commitment that is going to possibly not leave us room in the future to do other things that we need to do. And so that's just a concern of mine. And I don't think we came up with a particular number of what we did not want to exceed. I think I heard the number one time, 35 or 40%, something like that. But I do think it's imperative to make sure we keep that in mind, because if 70% of this budget is going to be allocated to ongoing costs, it's not, in my opinion, it's not going to leave a lot of room in the future to do other projects.
Thank you, Committee Member Prince. Point and something that is definitely in our minds as well. Staff has actually been researching that topic by referral from the City Council. And what's interesting is we're finding that there's no real playbook on this. Anytime when you go to do something, you say, well, what's been done out there? Let's do our homework, let's do our analysis. And no one has taken quite that approach before, and so maybe we can be the trendsetters on that. So we are preparing some recommendations for the Budget and Finance Committee of the City Council to talk about that specific topic of having a particular benchmark for ongoing within the PSVS funding. So while I acknowledge that that is present in our minds, do also want to reflect back that a big portion of that $50 million is, we consider it ongoing, but they are flexible. Things like contributions to our economic opportunity area funds, our economic development revitalization dollars to do brownfield redevelopment projects. There are many millions of dollars in that $50 million that as we change course in 3 to 5 years, or as we've made progress, we can say, well, do we really need to keep those contracts going, or do we need to keep those funding allocations to some of those programs in place? And we can pivot really quickly on those a little bit differently than we might be able to pivot on, for example, the staffing. And so we included that number on staffing is about 35% of the overall costs for PSVS's staffing, and we're really keying in on that number. We don't want that number to go too high, but there are a number of other funding pieces in the ongoing that are pretty flexible based on our strategies and how we may need to shift those. And you'll probably see from some of the recommendations that we're still making sure there are those big chunks set aside for the important work that we do, but it's still a really good point that we need to keep that capacity there, and we agree with that.
Thank you very much. You also mentioned 35%. It also indicates here that this does not include any additional staffing or ongoing costs associated with the proposals that the committee will be receiving over the next 30 days. So ultimately, if those other proposals were adopted, then that 36% would increase dramatically as well, due to the fact that in those proposals, there is a request for more staffing.
Yeah, committee member Prince, our apologies. I do believe that the 36% number, and we will certainly do a bit of homework on that, but I do believe based upon some preliminary estimates that is, the 36% number is related to the proposals that will be before you over the coming months, and I apologize if that was phrased incorrectly in the staff report. But we'll do a bit more homework, and we will update that for the committee and for the public on the next go-around. The $37 million number and the $50 million number are still reflective of what I just talked about. So as we move into local parks and streetscapes, again, another focus area of the measure, the council and the committee and the public, we do expect to bring forward to you a proposal to further enhance the Parks Rapid Response Team. The Parks team will bring forward kind of some more detail around what that team will actually be able to accomplish for the community, but we do have a continued focus on not just that parks maintenance, but also enhancement of streetscapes and that the city is maintaining. So this program would go in part to that beautification effort that we're looking to enhance. On the capital side of things, this proposal includes about $4.6 million specifically in neighborhood parks and local parks projects. And again, we're going to dive into a lot of that information in the coming meetings, but wanted to pull out a few highlights for this committee and for the public today. Out of this $4.6 million, it includes a $1 million allocation to begin what we're calling 2 local park reinvention projects. This is not a rehab project. This is really looking at opportunities in our park system to reinvent these spaces, existing spaces. We're looking at a facility needs assessment for both Martin Luther King and Silver Creek Community Centers. Those 2 centers have been operated for many years, and there have been obviously evolutions in the needs of the community. And this will be a process for those 2 facilities to go through this process to get essentially new ideas about how that space can be used and what is needed in those communities and how we can better utilize those spaces.
So, the reinvention projects, have you targeted certain parks for this, or are you talking about the reinvention of maybe several parks within the community?
It's a good question, Committee Member Rowland. They do not have the parks targeted. We are thinking that it would be limited to 2 because we can't really do system-wide reinvention on that dollar amount. But part of the feedback that we've heard from this committee and the community and even council is that just rehabbing, is important, but doesn't get us that extra level. And so we added in this element to be able to at least start with 2 parks to do above and beyond. And that's a point that we'll be able to discuss with council. The committee may have feedback on that today, but ultimately we'll address that with the council, but want to at least have this set aside so we can do above and beyond just the rehabs.
One other question. With regard to the rapid response teams, you're saying that there may be a proposal for 4 new positions and the necessary equipment to create another rapid response team. And didn't we, in the last meeting, just authorize another, rapid response team?
And again, as we come forward, as the parks teams comes forward, I believe this is actually supplementing some existing teams to provide overlapping, looking at Ms. Kitchen over there because I think she has the details, an overlapping 10-hour, 7-day-a-week program. So this is not a full new rapid response team. It's supplementing the existing teams to provide a broader service to the community. And so again, as we get into those second meetings, we will, in the third meeting, again, today is not the detail day, but we will get into those details for you, but absolutely. Again, going back to the parks projects themselves, we've talked to this committee and the public about the deferred maintenance list, and frankly, through the recommendations that have been made to this committee and the recommendations that have been made to the city council, we have been able to program, I believe it's about $17.8 million to the park system through the Public Safety and Vital Services measure since its inception. That doesn't include the 4.6 that is in this proposal today. And again, a lot of that is getting at that deferred maintenance list that we've talked to you all about. So I think we're getting much closer to having that list exhausted in terms of the original list. There's always more deferred maintenance that will come, but for those initial targeted projects, we're getting closer with this next proposal. And then there's going to be some other larger projects that we're going to talk to you about at Jastrow Park, at both Campus Park North and South, at the Aquatic Center just next door here, San Miguel Grove, and citywide splash pad enhancements as well. So more to come there. Next slide, please. One of the other main focus areas has been economic and community development. And this, again, was a new department that was introduced this last budget cycle. And so I know they have been ramping up greatly in terms of staffing and resources. But one of the highlights, new and expanded funding that will be coming before this committee to consider for some various economic and community development activities includes a culture resources survey, which is in part a process to review things like historical properties throughout the city, which is something that has not been done in some time. Business assistance, we have some dollars in the current budget that this committee reviewed for business assistance, but there will be some expansion to that program. Economic strategy planning and implementation. This is a project right now that Ms. Kitchen and her team are leading, and there will be some implementation that will go along with that. And again, you're going to hear more about this in a few meetings. There are some other programs too, new business marketing funding, community revitalization, and workforce development. Again, there are going to be dollars earmarked for each of these areas that we'll talk a bit more in the coming meetings that are intended, again, to get at several needs of the community that have been brought forth over the last several years. Sir.
Mr. Clegg, there's no dollar figure assigned to this. Have you got a dollar figure in mind about economic and community development? And as you know, I think we, at the last meeting, unanimously proposed that the city spend a significant amount of measure in funds for economic redevelopment of Southeast Bakersfield and Old Town Kern. Can you give us any kind of an idea of what kind of 2021, 2022 funds you might allocate toward that?
Absolutely, Community Member Rowland, and part of the reason that you don't see a dollar figure there yet is because we're in the input process. Part of it is also we're digging into some of the concepts and reviewing numbers internally, but we welcome comments and thoughts around this as well. I think you're going to expect to see probably around $7 million for community and economic development overall, and how that shakes out to these different categories again is subject to some consideration and review. But I would think that we're probably looking at around $1 million to improve our ability to do the business assistance and those kind of programs that a typical city offers. Probably around $2 million for being able to implement recommendations in our economic development strategy. In reality, we could probably spend tens of millions of dollars implementing our economic development strategy, but that is intended to be a set aside for this particular year, and I think we'll need to do that every year for a number of years. And when it comes to community revitalization, I'm going to recommend approximately $3 million to be able to do community revitalization projects on an annual basis for coming years. But again, there's some room for some consideration there. And then in addition to that, some of these other categories are probably smaller dollar figures in there, but I think some monies to help have some of these economic development ambassadors and marketers is going to have some good return on investment, but those are probably smaller dollar figures than some of the bigger chunks I just mentioned.
And then, as we have for the last several years, there will be some additional funding. I believe it's around the $5 million mark right now for affordable housing construction funds. And Ms. Kitchen and her team will be able to provide this committee, I think, with a great snapshot of the work that has been done and the number of units that have been added over the last several years. That's one important component of the funding of the measure. There will be, we're anticipating 2 planner positions, as Mr. Clegg mentioned, to enhance some of our business assistance programs and workforce development, as well as that growth and marketing arm of the city, as we're trying to, again, enhance the business climate and business retention and business attraction throughout the community. Next slide, please. Some other major infrastructure projects that you'll see that that staff will be proposing. One is our freeway corridor beautification program. Again, there has been quite a bit of feedback provided that our freeway corridors are essentially our first impression areas of the community. The city does not have direct control over most of those areas. They are Caltrans jurisdiction, so we do have to work closely with our partners in Caltrans to get this work done. Most of the time for these projects, it'll be a capital investment by the city, and then I believe Caltrans will do predominantly the ongoing maintenance. So with that being said, we have several that are proposed. One would be State Route 58 corridor beautification enhancements, essentially a first phase. I believe the dollar amount we have penciled in right now for this project is about $2.3 million. So again, this is a first step. This would provide landscape, hardscape enhancements in one or more areas along State Route 58. This money is specifically earmarked for the east of the 99 freeway. State Route 99 at Hosking Avenue. This was a recently constructed interchange of several years ago, and part of this program would enhance that interchange. It's one of our most southern entrances to the city. There is a monument sign just to the south of this interchange that really welcomes individuals that are driving through on northbound 99 to the city, and so this is the appropriate place to really enhance some landscaping and doing some treatments in that interchange. On State Route 99, we do want to update some monument signs. You may have seen that cover slide. If you're familiar with those Welcome to Bakersfield signs, we have not landed on a final design just yet. But this should be one of those beautification projects that is a first impression type of project within our corridor. And then the West Side Parkway. If you've driven the West Side Parkway, you know the current landscape treatment is predominantly wood chips. And again, as we look to the future and trying to raise the level of beautification in some of these areas, and these first impression areas in the community, staff will be proposing the first phase of 3 phases to make changes to the West Side Parkway to enhance a bit more of the landscaping there.
And if I could say a little bit more about that, because again, it looks like capital infrastructure, it's Caltrans, property. We really feel like that is an economic development, tactic, because it really is the message that is sent about Bakersfield as people come through Bakersfield. In addition, as everyone is well aware, as you drive, through 99, the sunken area, and you just see dirt embankments with weeds and debris. It is a very costly maintenance. And so we're looking to begin a process where for all of our corridors, we begin to have some hardscapes that have a better look and feel, but then they're also much easier to maintain. The things that have gravel or other similar treatments we're not talking about adding bunches of trees and plants because of the climate and the conditions. The next time we're going through a drought period, we don't want to lose those beautifications. When we say beautification, we're talking about creating a much better look and feel as you come in and out of the city, but that also creates some efficiencies and cost savings and our ability to maintain those over time and not have overgrown vegetation and debris collecting in those areas.
The next project that we are going to be proposing, staff will be proposing under the Public Works Department, will be a complete streets project on Chester Avenue from 4th Street to Brundage Lane, in Wards 1 and Wards 2, I believe. This is a project that would leverage state funding, state grant funding, to make significant bicycle and pedestrian improvements within this corridor. So we're talking bike lanes, sidewalks, bulb outs. This was part, I believe, of improvements that were identified in the past safety study. And again, the city received $200,000 or so from a state grant. Does need some additional funding to make sure the entire scope of the project is completed. This was one of those projects from staff standpoint that made a lot of sense to bring forward with leveraging this funding source to see those improvements made in this area. Similarly, along Chester Avenue, there were some funds budgeted, I believe, outside of Measure N last year to essentially start a process, a visioning process to enhance Chester Avenue from State Route 58 to Truxton Avenue. And again, this was meant to improve a commercial corridor that needs, again, a bit of a refresh. And so what we're looking to do is take a lot of that feedback that we've received over the last year or so, that we've gone through a process, and actually now get into the design phase. And Nick Fidler, Public Works Director, will talk a bit more about kind of what that looks like and some of those improvements in an upcoming meeting. As again, we've heard additional streetlights are needed, and I know that we are anxiously awaiting that streetlight study to be completed. Mr. Fidler has told me, I believe, that that study will be done in its first phase within the next several weeks, and we do anticipate bringing that to the City Council in that time frame. And then we'll begin to start to implement. As you recall, we have added funds in the budget over the last couple cycles to start to actually hit the ground running, so to speak, and installing streetlights in those priority areas that have been identified in the study. What we're looking to here is actually an additional allocation, again, of about $1 million in next year's budget to continue the work. This will be a multi-year process to continue to add streetlights in those areas that do not currently meet city standard or fall into one of the priority areas that the study is going to identify. We're also looking to enhance some existing infrastructure within the Mill Creek area. Again, a highly utilized park and pedestrian corridor. And there are some upgrades that we'll talk about that have to do with some of the bollards and some of the traffic control and pedestrian safety areas that we're going to enhance through this proposal. Next slide, please. The fire department, their new staffing will be proposed for the fire department this year. The Chief Galagesa and his team will come before you and talk a bit about some minor capital improvement and equipment acquisition that they are looking to acquire using PSVS funds to essentially maintain or enhance some of the specialized services that have in part been added through the measure over the last several years and have significantly improved response and service levels from the fire department. We continue to use that ISO rating as one benchmark in terms of how the external stakeholders essentially rate the fire department. I'm pleased to tell this group, and I think we've shared it with you before, that through the most recent rating period, I believe we are still a Class 2 fire department, but within that bandwidth for Class 2, we're actually able to slightly increase the rating, due in part, again, to the investments that have been made through the measure. Next slide, please. On the public works, on the operating side of things, just a few items. One would be a request to add a civil engineer position, and this position would actually be dedicated primarily to project management and consultant management for measure-funded projects. So most of the projects that we're talking about here today will require both internal resources and external resources to complete, whether that's engineering, design, construction, right-of-way, environmental. So we are really looking to bolster our engineering group to be able to provide someone that can really focus on these measure projects solely to move them from ideas on paper and in front of this committee and in front of the city council to actually completion and benefit and at the benefit of the community. One additional craft worker position within the General Services Division to provide facility maintenance and to address certain needs as we're growing as an organization. Just a quick reflection on this room in particular. It was one project that our General Services team was actually able to get to through funding from the measure, and as this facility reopens, this will be one of those nice new opportunities that will we expect to be able to draw additional events to this facility. In this position, in part, will bolster the General Services Division that does work just like this each and every day for the city. And then our Clean City Initiative. This committee reviewed a $1.5 million allocation this past year to start our Clean City Initiative. I'm really pleased to tell you, and I'm really excited for Mr. Fiddler to share with you some of the successes that we've seen over the last several months that we've had with our Clean City Initiative. So we're not looking to, at this point in time, add any additional teams or add really any sort of significant resources. We think we're in a good position right now in terms of the work that's being done. But there will be some very minor staffing-related costs to support what we're calling our citywide pop-up bulky item drop-off events. These events you've probably seen, hopefully, them out in the community. We are rotating them in all 4 quadrants and in central Bakersfield. These are opportunities for individuals to bring large items that may not fit in their tan cans to drop off. And part of the thought process behind those was, our landfills are located in areas that are kind of geographically, they can be a long drive for a lot of folks. And this is a convenient way to get those bulky items into the right trash can, so to speak, and not dumping them in mattresses or in alleys or in other parts of the community. So again, a lot of success. Nick will share with you some data from these events, and look forward to just tweaking the program slightly with some minor additions here to continue those events as they are today. Next slide. Development services. The last couple of years, we brought to this committee proposals to add predominantly on the code enforcement side rapid response teams to address predominantly homeless-related issues in the community. This proposal will look a little bit different. We're requesting this year for this cycle, as I believe about 8 positions total for code enforcement, but these would not be rapid response teams. This would be positions that will be strategically added to address what we're calling non-encampment issues affecting quality of life issues through neighborhoods. This could be nuisance properties, illegal property uses, neighborhood stability type of issues. Mr. Boyle in this kitchen will speak to this likely in future discussions, but the team has not been expanded, frankly, since 2018. And I believe at the time, and still, I believe we're around 11, I have that number right, 11 code enforcement officers that are outside of our rapid response teams that are dealing with things, property-related issues in neighborhoods for the entire city. So there really is a need, in staff's opinion, to bolster this group to, again, provide the level of service, but also have the outcomes as well in terms of responsible property ownership and addressing issues that affect local neighborhoods. Also,
I just want to interrupt you really quick with your other slide, your clean city initiative that should provide the coffee bulk item drop-off events. I mean, something that considers people don't have the transportation to take their sofas or their mattresses. You know, what would it look like to have a day where you can put it on the curb? I mean, didn't we do that once upon a time? Anyway, just something to think about realistically.
I appreciate you bringing that up because it's an opportunity to highlight something that Nick's teams in our office are trying to highlight, which you're right. We have already a bulky item pickup program that probably doesn't get as much attention as it should. And so we're working on opportunities to highlight that as well, because yes, we do recognize that not everyone has a pickup truck or a friend with a pickup truck or a trailer to get some of these large items to and from or to these events. So yes, that's a great point. We do have a bulky pickup item. We're actually looking at ways to make accessing that program a bit easier through the mobile app as well. So thank you for the opportunity to highlight that. Did want to touch, last bullet point here, there is a proposal to add a planning position and some contract services to provide support for some citywide initiatives regarding both the general plan update and our overall annexation strategy. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we move forward. Next slide, please. In our human resources department, we're looking for one additional position to be added. This position would be predominantly focused on the ongoing recruitment efforts of the Bakersfield Police Department. We are seeing the department engage in multiple academies in a given year. As we shared with you in a previous meeting, the application process and the recruitment process is very intensive. And having a dedicated analyst that is focused, wouldn't be the only analyst necessarily supporting the effort, but one that would be the point person would go a long way in just being able to continue to meet the demands that it takes to fill those positions that are necessary to put more officers on the street.
And it's been asked often, and I appreciate the interest in, you know, where are we at in our staffing numbers? How, you know, are we increasing? Are we having those net gains? And we've been doing a lot of hiring. You know, we've hired more than 100 officers in the last 2 years alone, and that's a significant number. But again, to have the emphasis to make sure we're making those gains, this is really intended to help with that recruitment, retention, to make that happen. You know, we've had some success in having laterals, and I think we mentioned that at our mid-year update to this group. We've had lateral officers apply to our force. That happened because our human resources director was calling around to other departments that we knew were having layoffs and trying to make connections there. While that is greatly applauded, and I'm thankful to her for taking that effort, that's, you know, in that strategic role at the department director level, it would make a big difference to have someone else at this analyst level making those connections, making those efforts and making sure that we're not leaving any stone unturned to reach those net gains possible.
I just have a couple more slides here, and then we'll turn it over for the discussion and comment. Lastly, in the Human Resources Department, looking for a new allocation, slightly under $85,000. Again, there's some ancillary costs associated with recruitment of police officers predominantly, and this would provide those necessary resources for things like testing and documentation and other types of services that are required in that period in which we're bringing on candidates for the academy. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'll turn it over to Mr. Clegg to walk through this slide, and then we'll wrap up.
It's not titled this way, but this is sort of our strategic and miscellaneous other investments slide. And so we continue to be interested in the reserves. The really good news is because of mid-year action that this committee approved and subsequently the city council approved, as of the end of this fiscal year, we will have met our reserve goals. But as revenues increase and the overall budget size increases, we need to keep putting that money away, and we think it's wise to put a little extra away. But some of the reserve figures that you've seen in the past will be a little bit smaller because we've been able to put away so much money early on and meet those goals. But we'll continue to have some money in there for reserves. In addition, of course, we've talked about our radio project, our ERP project. We're not proposing in this budget additional funds for ERP out of the annual allocation, but we do think it makes sense to consider a little more funding in the radio project, and if we have some of these year-end fund balances, that may make sense to spend money on the ERP, but we're actually looking at that cost-sharing allocation, as member President Andreessen had asked about, what are the other funds sharing into those costs. We're actually doing that analysis initially before we determine if additional funds ought to come from PSVS towards that, but may take a look at that from fund balance over at mid-year, almost a year from now. Of course, we mentioned the affordable housing earlier. We just threw that in here again. A $5 million allocation would be the third year in a row with that allocation to really get at that issue, and we think that is merited, for years to come. At least the next 2 or 3 years. And then wanted to reflect that we're continuing to think about some of these investments that can be pretty strategic, not huge dollar amounts, but have a big return on investment. And so this past year, we looked at our legislative advocacy, and that has been in process. We're also, this year, we've been looking at that risk assessment to really give sort of that second opinion review of where things are at in the city. Going forward, I would like to follow up on that risk assessment and pick a number of projects to have performance audits done based on where we think our risks are. And that would probably be a modest investment, maybe a few $100,000, depending on how many of those we want to do in any given year. But it helps keep us on point and make sure that we're being efficient and that we're doing what we're trying to do well. And with that, I would also recommend that we have a staff individual who's focusing on performance and innovation, actually, in the organization, performance and innovation officer, who's driving those system-wide reviews and improvements to make sure that we are efficient and that we're improving the way that we do business at the city. Along with that, we had a recent presentation to the City Council on what's called an innovation lab. The city and the county are partnering with Bitwise to create a technology and business incubation center. And we're going to recommend those as innovation dollars that are coming out of PSVS to create entrepreneur and small business cohorts. And we can provide some of the numbers that are behind that, but it would look like essentially creating 20 new small businesses a year out of that process, and the many other jobs that come from those new businesses. But that's about probably a $500,000 investment in that innovation lab. But again, we need to not only do some of this catch-up, and we need to start doing some of that innovation and have some of those game changers begin in the community. And then lastly, we know, as I mentioned before, economic development, our strategic plan will be done shortly, and we also have some of the large capital projects that we've reviewed through efforts like the Making Downtown Vision Plan, the Transformative Climate Communities Plan. There are many big projects that will make a big change in the community, and we want to have some funds set aside to make sure that we can go and tackle those big projects.
Anything I want to say, next slide, please, for the last time today, hopefully. Yes, all right. So again, today's meeting was intentional in terms of how we structured it as it relates to the future meetings. So today was really a high-level programmatic discussion of where staff is looking to head in terms of some of the themes and objectives for next year as it relates to the measure. What you're going to see over the next 2 meetings are those detailed documents that will reflect specific line items and dollar amounts for the detail that are behind these proposals that we touched upon very briefly today. So what our plan of action is for the committee is to come back on April 9th. You will hear from the police department, the fire department, the public works department, and I've actually added that citywide strategic initiatives section to get you all information in detail on that. And then again, we're looking to find that date and time that works for all of you for later in April when we bring back the balance of those departments and have them provide the presentations to you as well. I did want to make a note again, just for clarity purposes, what we are going to be doing is taking each of the departments that you see, both for the April 9th meeting and for the late April meeting. What we'll be doing is trying to compile the entirety of those documents, those detailed documents, and getting those to you prior to the April 9th meeting. So you'll have everything, but you'll hear the presentations over 2 dates. That's the plan as we have laid it out today. Again, a lot different than last year when we were trying to walk through a lot of the proposals very quickly. So with that, I will pause and turn it back over to Chair Sanders for further dialogue. Thank you.
I wanted to take a quick 5-minute break, but before we do that, can we go ahead and go through the minutes and get an official approval on the minutes?
Motion by Committee Member Louie to accept the minutes from the February 11th, 2020 Oversight Committee meeting.
I'll take it.
Thank you. We'll do a roll call.
Chair Sanders?
Yes.
Vice Chair Hubbard?
Yes.
Committee members Keller?
Yes, ma'am.
Holt?
Aye.
Perez Andreessen is absent. Prince?
Yes.
Roland?
Aye.
Louis?
Aye.
And Tobias?
Aye.
Motion is approved with Committee Member Perez Andreessen absent.
Thank you. Like I said, I wanted to open up a 5-minute break for the committee members. Upon our return, there are 3 other public comments, and we'll give time for that, and then open it up to any committee discussions before we wrap up. I do have a hard stop personally at 1:50 today. My co-chair, Mr. Hibbert, has agreed to take over if we get to that time. So we will reconvene in exactly 5 minutes. 1:56. Mr. Turnipseed, we'll take your public comment first if you don't mind.
Huh? You're out. She just called you. She did?
And again, I just want to limit these to 2 minutes, please.
I'll talk fast.
We have 3 public comments and we'll open it up to the board.
Basically, quickly, push the button, okay. I'm Michael Turnipseed, I represent the Kern County Taxpayers Association.
Quickly, again, I'm disappointed that immediately 3 months go by, we had the same amount of police on the street that we had then. We still have, what, 303, 4 or 5? We had, 400. We had 400 back in November of 2018. We voted for this. This is a critical thing that's been moving nowhere. Whatever the dynamic is, crime's up, everything's up. If you have a catalytic converter and still have it, you're very lucky because it's still in Milwaukee, East Bakersfield. Next question that I'm looking at is the homeless issue. If you read the report put out by the Homeless Collaborative in the fourth quarter, homeless increased 750 and only 250 got housed. Net loss of, an increase of 500. And there are more people walking on the street now than any time I can ever remember. On the economic development side, I did talk to Mr. Glenn during the break. There has to be matrices. We have to judge things on what goals and priorities we set, and we have to judge our spending by how efficient, how effectively we get that done, reach our goals. The next thing is the interest of beautification. I'm all for beautification, bushes and trees. There's a drought coming. We better start acting like we're Phoenix instead of Bakersfield, I'm sorry. And then I had the question, I've been following the TCC's process, Transformative Climate Communities, and it's virtually impossible to see the conversation at the city is all about downtown and west of Union. I'm looking at projects here, parks getting fixed. I'd like to see an accounting of how much is being spent east of Union. There are people that live there. They pay taxes, so maybe they need some of the same services the rest of the town gets. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next we'll do Ms. Del Rosa. Yes, did you get that right? Yes.
Hello, thank you for the opportunity to ask a few questions. First of all, the upcoming meetings and the detailed documents, I just would like some commitment that those detailed documents would go out to the public at least a few days prior to the meeting, April 6th maybe, which is a Tuesday before before Friday, as well as some meeting invites. Or if the meeting can be please posted on the calendar on the website, that would be great, especially for the meeting that is not yet scheduled. The B3K process. The B3K initiative received funding, I believe from the state already to begin the work. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of funding in order to get this going, but Kern County also allocated some resources to B3K, so whatever funding will go to B3K should be outlined, detailed, and include line items. We just want to see exactly what is being spent on B3K for transparency and communication. And I believe our committee chair mentioned it maybe a few meetings ago to show asked the city staff to show some data results of investing in law enforcement and how that has changed our crime rates or violence and all those things that law enforcement is supposed to address. If we can please revisit that. I know correlation doesn't always mean causation, but we still would like to see that there is, that the investment is actually effective and that it's actually helping our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. And last, we'll call up Ms. Patel.
Yeah, touching on what Emma said, you guys know the LA County DA has like an immense amount of information on why crime does not be reduced with more police on the street. There's like numerous studies. We're not idiots. We all work for community-based organizations and groups. We have mountains of evidence to back up what we're saying. I am more shocked. One, you guys have done such a poor job of really engaging the community. There is literally, most of the people here are either work for the city or like, this is so poor. And you're holding it at noon on a Thursday. No community member will be here. And I really want to stress, I don't understand why one of the first things you aren't asking Christian Clegg right now is why you are not asking him to support a participatory budgeting process for this community. Like, this is very bare minimum. Asking the community, or letting the community have a say in where their taxpayer money goes is so bare minimum, I don't even understand why this hasn't been a discussion. It honestly eludes me. And then finally, we're doing a lot of placating about unhoused community members. You guys all have each other's phone numbers, you guys can text each other. This isn't like, we understand everyone is 1 to 3 degrees of separation away from each other when it comes to Bakersfield especially. FEMA has allowed shelter-in-place hotels to be completely reimbursable all the way back up to January 2020 of last year. It's free money, it's reimbursable, and we have 1,500 plus unhoused community members that need housing. This is so stupid. Why are you not telling Christian Clegg, this is what we need to do if we really want to put our money where our mouth is? This is free money, and we can house all of our community members. This is so unbelievably removed from the actual needs of the community. All of this slideshow presentation, you guys really don't, like, it's so removed from the realities of what our community is facing.
Thank you. That will close our public comment time. I will now open up to our fellow committee members if you guys had any comments, questions for staff, or in general.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'll start, if you don't mind. Just a quick question in regards to, I know since I've been a part of this committee, I have been asking questions and trying to really push for street light installations. And it appears that going on the 3rd year, the study is still either ongoing or is the study completed? I wasn't sure based upon the response to that.
Apologize if I was not clear. The study is essentially at the finish line, and I do anticipate, Nick, can you confirm, but I do believe we were planning on taking it to the council in May.
Yeah,
The first meeting in May, probably May 5th, to review that with the council. Those dollars that this committee had previously reviewed for installation are in the budget and ready to go. So the next checkpoint in that process is likely the first council meeting in May, and then we'll begin the improvements from there.
Okay. And that timeline that it took from start to finish, is that pretty typical, or was it a little slow based upon whatever reasons, but it just appeared that it was ongoing for a long period of time?
Sheriff Sanders through Mr. Prince, Committee Member Prince. It is slow. Unfortunately, we had a pandemic that fell right in the middle of the process. We did go through a consultant selection process in late 2019. We were in the process of making a recommendation to council for that consultant, and they pulled their proposal from us. So we had to then go back and reinitiate with our second vendor. We were in the process of taking that to council, and then the pandemic hit and kind of put the brakes on. We didn't have enough staff available to work through that process. But later in summer 2020, we were able to reinitiate it to start the program. And it's very difficult because of this time. There's very limited consultants available or staffing available because of the pandemic. So that was probably our biggest challenge, and they are doing a very thorough job. They are reviewing, we have 435 intersections. So they're reviewing a good portion of those intersections for like lighting, taking lighting meters and checking them. So they're reviewing all the accident data that the city police department has. They're looking at pedestrian studies and bicycle studies to see where accidents occur. They're looking at crime data. So there's a lot of data that has to be filtered to create this list. And then on top of that, there's a lot of areas in the community that are unlighted completely. So they have to go through the city and identify all those areas. We do have a GIS map that shows where all these areas are, but there's just a lot of data that they have to process in order to come up with a adequate study and a list of priority projects.
Thank you very much. And then just one other question. In in regards to, since we're notified today, well, I was notified today about the 96 million that's going to be allocated over the next 2 years. Will the proposals that we will be receiving be considering any of those funds as well as a part of the proposal itself?
Thank you, committee member, and through the chair. To clarify, I think the question, there may be projects that have a blending of funding that we would reflect here, but say, the other portions coming from that pot. And as we look at all of our potential projects, we are comparing them against those funding sources and where it is eligible and where it fits. But specifically, we don't plan to bring the $48 million to this committee to vet out fully the same way we do the PSVS budget.
Okay, yeah, I don't think that was my question. Would the 48 million actually go into the general budget, which in turn these funds then could be used for some of the proposals that you will be requesting from the PSVS? That was my question.
Thank you for your clarification, committee member Prince. No, we don't. I'm sorry for that static. We don't anticipate taking some of these projects off the table that could be funded by the 48 million. In part, though, as we looked at some of the potential ideas, we have actually already taken some of those off the table and said, well, that maybe is a better fit for those Rescue Act dollars instead of bringing them forward to PSVS. So we've done a little bit of that already, but we wouldn't probably take any of these projects off the table and fund them through that other program. There's other, many other projects that we'll put into that bucket.
Thank you.
I'll go next. Or did you don't? So I went a different route, so I just took notes as we went, so I'm gonna go back. Rapid fire, random thoughts by Brian Holt. So back to the deferrals, to the state, you said it's 1.2 million. And is that all of the city taxes? That's strictly measuring?
That's measuring sales tax for the fourth quarter.
For the fourth quarter?
Yeah.
And how long was that program?
It was reinitiated, Randy, I don't know if you have the details, but it was reinitiated late in 2020, so the fourth quarter was the first quarter where we saw kind of another ramp up of those deferrals happening. What we had seen in previous quarters is, if we go back to the first quarter in 2020, I think that was the first quarter where we actually started to see some of those deferrals happening, and they trailed off a little bit. They got fewer and fewer. Third quarter, I think, I'm going off memory, but I think the third quarter was like $300,000. And then the state announced another round of deferral opportunity, and so they jumped back up to 1.2 million in the fourth quarter.
Does that extend into 2021?
It does, yes. There are some provisions for extension in 2021.
Okay. And then on the kind of the ongoing costs discussion. So, I get it. We want to do it all. I think the unfortunate thing was that we were tasked early on, we, the city, with the two big ticket items of the measure, which was getting more police on the street and then the homeless crisis. And both of those, I see a lot of recurring costs. So I wonder if maybe in the future when we talk about the recurring costs, if there was more of a breakdown. Like instead of saying there's 50 million, we saw what percentage were those kind of the big ticket items that everyone for the most part agreed on early on that we were going to tackle. You can't put 100 police officers on the street and not have recurring costs. You can't build a navigation center and fund it and process all those folks without recurring costs. So that might help, I think, in future discussions on that. On the parks, you talked about a facility needs assessment for Martin Luther King. So if I remember, there was some talk a few months back on maybe some county property, and there was a project that a lot of the community members were interested in. Is that assessment, is that kind of the first step in that process, or is that included in that?
So the assessment is just for our current footprint, our current facility, and the activities that are in there. It is a fairly aged facility, but it is not addressing that county parcel adjacent to the facility.
And then on parks, and we were proud of how much Measure Rent is put into that, and I think it's kind of skewed when we say that, because of the two large projects on the outskirts of town that personally I see more as kind of the economic development, instead of the core, those urban parks that we've had discussions about on. So, you know, when you say that, it kind of doesn't really sit right with me because of that. That was more a comment than a question. And the last one. Okay, so the information that we are going to have before the next meeting will also be made public. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Yeah.
Thanks, guys. A couple of questions just to follow up and make sure my math is correct. On the increase over year, 37 million, 50 million with the additional elements for fiscal year 22, basically we're going up by $13 million in ongoing costs.
That's our estimate.
Okay. Is the 36% of salaries, is 36% of 50 or 36% of the 77?
Thank you for allowing me to clarify that. I appreciate that. So the 36% that I have estimated is based upon, it's 36% of the $50 million number is ongoing salary benefit costs. The remainder, that 18%, is other ongoing costs, and then you have, you know, one-time cost or capital type costs outside of that. That makes the balance there. Thank you.
Thank you. Two last quick things. One is, as the proposals are being put forth for this year, one of the questions that several of us asked early on is some type of benchmark on the outcomes, the performance of where we've invested. In our world, it's more around a return on investment or something along those lines. And I know it's not necessarily equivalent in this piece, but there should be some type of metric, some type of key performance indicators that I would task and challenge the department heads to come back with to say, we invested X million dollars in this project, and the return on that is more citizens served, more people in the parks, more revenue as a result of the improvements in, you know, this infrastructure and those things. So that would be a request as we get into the footprints for next year's. And the last is I would request diligently looking at opportunities to get some additional participation through the community within the budget that's being processed and the projects that are being put forth. Whether it's through surveys, whether it's through emails, whether it's through getting information out ahead of time, something along those lines that Dixon could. Thank you.
Anybody on the side?
Basically, I wanted to echo Keith Keller's ROI discussion, that those benchmarks and that was how we really got started in the last segment. We seem to kind of lose that focus, and bringing that back, I think, would be helpful. And if an ROI is not appropriate, there are benchmarks that are. So let's help us find that, or help each other find those benchmarks that are good to measure. Did the investment work? Did we get a achievable goal, or didn't we? And if we did not, why are we going to do the same thing again?
Any other comments?
One thing, I don't want to belabor, but yeah, I agree with the performance matrix ROI on that. I'd like to see that. Particularly where we're investing a lot of money, whether it be fire, or police, or whatever, is the crime rate going down, et cetera. And also, I would highly encourage community participation in the review of the spendings of these dollars, whether it's through surveys or community meetings or something of that sort.
Good deal. If there's no other comments, does Mr. Louie have any closing remarks?
Thank you, Chair Sanders. My comments actually have been covered by the other committee members.
Sounds good, thanks. With that, we'll go ahead and adjourn the meeting at 1:48. Thank you.
Chair, sorry, if we had anticipated just a simple motion to receive and file the presentation.
Sure, we can do that.
I'll make that motion.
Thank you, Tom.
I will second that motion.
Chair Sanders,
Yes.
Vice Chair Hibbert,
Yes.
Committee Member Keller,
Yes, ma'am.
Holt,
Aye.
President Reesman is absent. Prince,
Yes.
Roland,
Yes.
Louis,
Aye.
and Tobias.
Aye.
Motion is approved with Perez and Reesman absent.